Chipko Andolan or movement that took Indian environmental activism to an altogether different level. I, in fact, had picked up a second-hand Fiat, which was my first car, and of course, the only one I could afford. And when the much sleeker looking and compact Maruti 800 was launched in 1983, it was seen as the people's car. Black rotary dial phones that now look like antique pieces. I'm sure all of you all remember that, the ones that you dial like this, and then you would hold with that wire across. And the waiting list to get a telephone was over 2 years. India then, in the mid-70s and 80s, was keen to do two things. It wanted to become self-sufficient in building satellites and then launching them using indigenous technology. By 1979, the Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO, had successfully built both the Aryabhatta and the Bhaskara satellites. Now, these were meant for development purpose. That was the other big thing, that India never just wanted to do it to say we have done it, but to employ satellites in terms of various development purposes, whether it's communication, remote sensing, and a whole other host of activities. They were very clear from the beginning. Now, everyone becomes a little boy, including me, when we go to watch a space launch. Worth watching, but that SLV-3 put India into the space map. Nothing but the truth. Hello, I'm Raj Chengappa of India Today and your host for Nothing But the Truth. Every week, we will deal with key issues of concern and bring you perspectives and clarity as to why these matter to you without holding back on the truth. India Today just celebrated its 49th anniversary. It's been a long but incredible journey for the magazine, which was founded by Arun Puri in 1975. I have had the privilege of being associated with the magazine since 1981, when I joined as its correspondent for South India and was based in what is Bangalore and now Bengaluru. Subsequently, I joined the National Bureau in Delhi in 1986. Except for a 5-year stint as editor-in-chief of the Tribune group of newspapers between 2010 and 2015, I've had a continuous run for over 3 decades with India Today magazine. And for me, there has never ever been a dull moment working for it. So for this year's anniversary special, we decided to focus on some of the key turning points that inspired India and Indians to achieve even greater heights. We know that there have been many developments in the past 5 decades that have negatively impacted the country, whether the emergency, it was on when India Today began, assassinations, disasters, riots, and political and economic strife. But for this anniversary issue, which is 49 years, as I said earlier, we decided to focus on those events and personalities that uplifted the nation during these years and in many ways revolutionized our lives. We homed in on 50 of such turning points for the magazine, and as it turned out, this has been or will be truly a collector's issue that you should pick up and read. But for this episode of Nothing But the Truth, I'm going to highlight just 5 of these turning points which I had the benefit of reporting firsthand. The first turning point that I'm going to focus on is the Chipko Andolan or movement that took Indian environmental activism to an altogether different level. Now, the movement began in the upper reaches of the mountains of Uttarakhand's Garhwal region in the mid-70s, especially in Chamoli, a small remote tehsil where deforestation had become rampant. The unique thing about the Chipko movement was that it was led mainly by women who were protesting against the rapid deforestation that had affected their livelihood. Now, this was caused by the indiscriminate commercial felling of trees that had led to flooding, soil erosion, landslides, and even a depletion of the water tables. The guiding spirit of the Chipko movement was the Gandhian ecologist Chandi Prasad Bhatt and the organization that he led that was called the Dasholi Gram Swarajya Mandal. In 1982, I drove to Chamoli to interview Bhatt and talk to the Chipko women. It took me almost 10 hours of driving through some of the most scenic views of the Himalayas, but unfortunately, I could also see the scars of deforestation. There were whole sections of the Himalayan mountains that had been stripped of tree cover, causing massive, really massive soil erosion and landslides. When I reached Chamoli, I met the bearded Chandi Prasad Bhatt, and he took me to meet the woman or the women who had spearheaded the Chipko movement. Among them, whom I spoke to, was Parvati Devi, and I remember her face was lined with toil and age, and she told me that it took her over a whole day to collect firewood because of the deforestation. Earlier, she would just go out and was able to pick up twigs. Now she had to go deeper and deeper into the forest to collect firewood. And remember, at that time, firewood was the main fuel for cooking. She was clear, Parvati Devi was clear that their trees must be preserved. She then told me how the women of Chamoli found a very unique way of protesting when the then government wanted to auction nearly 2,500 trees in the region for commercial felling to, if I recall, a sports good company. Now, when the loggers approached the forest, the Chamoli women embraced the trees earmarked for felling and told the loggers that their axe would have to fell them first. That brave and poignant act of hugging trees, Chipko means to cling in Hindi, was a powerful, non-violent protest to save their forests. It saw the UP government and the central government relent and pass orders that in the higher ranges of the Himalayas, commercial felling would be banned for a period of 15 years. Chandi Prasad Bhatt told me then, and I'm quoting him, "Our movement goes beyond the erosion of land to the erosion of human values. If we are not in a good relationship with the environment, we will be destroyed apart from destroying it." The Chipko movement inspired activists for decades across India to save their ecosystems. This included preventing destructive mining projects, hydropower dams that wantonly swamp forests and people's houses and villages, and of course, industrial pollution. The Chipko movement brought in the process kind of a governmental institution called an environment impact assessment before every project was sanctioned. That meant that the government would have to listen to local communities, hear their concerns for any mining or infrastructure development project. This also led to the Forest Rights Act passed in 2006, which gave forest dwellers ownership of land and forest resources. So Chipko was not just an event that happened in the mid-70s and 80s, but also was a critical turning point that inspired environmental organizations, not just in the country, but even across the world. This brings me to the second turning point that brought back a lot of memories to me, and I'm sure for many of you all too. And this was the launch of the Maruti 800 car. Now, before the compact Maruti car was launched, we could only choose from either the matronly looking Ambassador car or the boxy looking Fiat. I, in fact, had picked up a second-hand Fiat, which was my first car, and of course, the only one I could afford. And when the much sleeker looking and compact Maruti 800 was launched in 1983, it was seen as the people's car, the true Aam Aadmi one. Maruti was a project close to then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's heart. It was her younger son Sanjay Gandhi's ambition to build such a car, but he tragically died in a plane crash in 1980. When Mrs. Gandhi returned to power the same year, the Maruti Udyog was founded in 1981 with V. Krishnamurthy as chairman and R.C. Bhargava as the sales and marketing director. Incidentally, Bhargava continues to be the chairman of what is now Maruti Suzuki and is regarded as an icon in the auto industry. What Maruti did was to fuel an auto boom that took off after the economic liberalization of 1991 in India. Now, that allowed 100% FDI, or foreign direct investment, being allowed in the auto industry, and it encouraged the use of new technology and models which further boosted demand. a large number of global players, which we see now on our roads, including the Mercedes-Benz, General Motors, Toyota, Ford, Skoda, and Volkswagen, entered the Indian market. And just to give you one figure, from selling just over 30,000 cars in 1980, annual sales of passenger cars in India rose to 4.23 million units last year. India, in fact, has become a global automotive player and is ranked third in the world in manufacturing and in auto parts. Maruti Suzuki still remains the highest selling cars in the country, though the 800 has been upgraded and the company has come up with many, many more models. But for a lot of us, the Maruti 800 car remains our favorite. I still remember how I drove it all the way to Sangla Valley in the high Himalayas with my family, and it never failed me. So the third turning point is the telecom revolution that has benefited all of us immensely and has become as vital to us as drinking water. But let me give you a scenario what happened before the advent of mobile telephones. We were all landed with what we call black rotary dial phones that now look like antique pieces. I'm sure all of you all remember that, the ones that you dial like this, and then you had to hold with that wire across. And the waiting list to get a telephone was over 2 years. In fact, that telephone had become such a status symbol that most people would put it or place it in their living rooms to showcase it to people that they had a phone. And to dial another state or city, I mean, this really looks so ancient, we had to make what was known as a trunk call. And after booking the call, it would take almost half an hour to get that call connected. All that changed when the then Narasimha Rao government did two big things. They opened up the telecom sector to private players in 1992 and then allowed the commencement of cellular mobile phone services in 1995. Now, I remember that in the previous year, that was 1994, I had covered the historic elections that saw Nelson Mandela and Black South Africa come to power for the first time. And I was very envious of the other foreign journalists who carried these handheld satellite-linked mobile phones to fix appointments, while poor me had to rely on using public phones, which meant a lot of time wasted going back to a hotel or finding a place where I had to make a call. Now, I thought at that time it would take decades for such a technology to reach India. But to my wonderful surprise, once the government opened up the telecom sector, India Today gave me a phone to use the very next year itself, 1996 itself, and that started our entire journey in terms of mobile phones. For all of us, life has never been the same. And in 1998, India Today actually carried a cover story called the New Cellerati Generation. Let me repeat that, the New Cellerati Generation, a phrase that we coined to describe how that had taken our lives and changed our lives, and continues to do so. Today, India's telecommunication network is the second largest in the world with close to 1.2 billion subscribers. And it is the cheapest when it comes to call charges. The sector's focus on affordability and tele-density, we have almost 90% of the country covered, has empowered even rural populations. From making UPI payments that has become ubiquitous to accessing social media and TV channels, all this can be done using a mobile phone. We are now truly an instantly connected India, and this has bridged divides and reshaped our aspirations. So the mobile phones is one of the big turning points when it was introduced in India, and you can see the impact it has made. That brings me to the fourth turning point, which is when India became the space power. Now, most people are familiar with the Chandrayaan and the recently launched Aditya solar mission, and think of that as the starting point of how India became one of the world's leading space powers. But being a Bangalore correspondent in the 1980s, I was very lucky to cover what was the actual origins of how the Indian Space Research Organization grew and became what it was. Now, India then, in the mid-70s and 80s, was keen to do two things. It wanted to become self-sufficient in building satellites and then launching them using indigenous technology. By 1979, the Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO, had successfully built both the Aryabhata and the Bhaskara satellites. Now, these were meant for development purpose. That was the other big thing, that India never just wanted to do it to say we have done it, but to employ satellites in terms of various development purposes, whether it's communication, remote sensing, and a whole other host of activities. They were very clear from the beginning. But the thing was that it was yet to succeed in building launch vehicles, satellite launch vehicles. It was around this time that I had met both the legendary Professor Satish Dhawan and later APJ Abdul Kalam. Before Kalam built missiles and then later became the President of India, he built spacecraft. Now, Dhawan made him project director, made Kalam project director of India's first satellite launch vehicle 3, or SLV-3, so-called because that was the third design that they had made of this vehicle, so it became SLV-3, which turned out in its first flight in 1979 to be a complete failure. It tumbled into the Bay of Bengal. Kalam was crestfallen, and he told me he wanted to resign, but Dhawan told him to continue, and Dhawan shouldered all the blame for the failure that year. The next year, on July 18th, 1980, the pencil-shaped SLV-3 flew flawlessly into the sky, and the world stood up and noticed India. Kalam became a hero, with Dhawan allowing the project team to take all the credit for the success of the launch. The SLV-3 not only demonstrated India's capability to design and build its own launch vehicles. Mind you, at that time it was a very, very difficult thing to do. Barely 4 nations had that capability. But the SLV-3 also laid the foundation for the development of more advanced launchers that could carry heavier and heavier payloads. The SLV-3 carried a payload of 40 kg satellite. Today we can launch satellites weighing 4 tons or 4,000 kgs with the GSLV series of launchers. That's how much progress we've made. So the SLV-3 mission transformed ISRO into a key player in the global space community. The Indian space program came to be appreciated around the world as a model of cost-effective indigenous technology development. I have had the privilege of witnessing many launches, and let me tell you, it is the best sound and lightning show you can see. Have you ever watched a rocket take off? As soon as it takes off, there's a flame that's almost a kilometer long, a bright orange flame, and you watch in awe as it lifts off, and then as it moves upward, you begin to hear the sound, and the sound is so deep. If I can put a comparison, it's like 30 Boeing jets being started at the same time. That is the roar of that. The entire building shakes, and then it disappears within a minute into the sky as it blazes into space. And that has been something, everyone becomes a little boy, including me, when we go to watch a space launch, worth watching. But that SLV-3 put India into the space map, and that's why I took that as the turning point, though in the magazine we also have Chandrayaan and the entire planetary exploration program that we have launched. Now, my 5th and final turning point for this episode is what is called Operation Meghdoot. This is when India gained the advantage in the world's highest and most inhospitable battlefield, the Siachen Glacier. Now, the glacier has an average height of 20,000 feet, close to 6,000 meters, and is situated on the stretch of the Himalayas that borders Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. The genesis of Operation Meghdoot lay in the very ambiguous demarcation of the line of control, or the LOC, between India and Pakistan. If you look at that map, where the LOC point ends, which was point NJ9842 as it is called, that area proceeding north to the glaciers, was left unclear. Now, Pakistan at that time began permitting foreign expeditions to the glaciers in the 1970s to bolster its claims for the territory, and wanted to, by using that, actually claim that Siachen Glacier belonged to them. Now, when intelligence reports revealed that Pakistan was preparing to occupy the glacier, India struck preemptively. Starting from April 13, 1984, the Indian Army ferried and supplied by helicopters and transport aircraft of the Indian Air Force, they were able to secure the glacier under Operation Meghdoot. Men and officers of the Command Regiment and the Ladakh Scouts faced blizzards, braved avalanches, suffered oxygen deficiency, and endured truly subarctic temperatures to occupy the heights. Scores of Indian soldiers lost their lives to hypothermia for the extreme cold that was there. Now, Operation Meghdoot marked a watershed moment in Indian military history, for seldom has the fortitude of our fighting men been tested in such punishing terrain and climate. I traveled to Siachen in 2005 along with my photographer colleague Bandeep Singh and experienced firsthand the bitter cold, the roaring winds, and the icy-laden cliffs that made it the world's most dangerous battleground. Most soldiers, mind you, have lost their life battling the severe conditions than in actual combat. That daring sally on the Siachen Glacier in 1984 is a landmark achievement of the Indian military. It instilled an ethos of readiness in securing national interests. We saw that in the Kargil War in 1999, which I covered, the 2006 surgical strikes and the Balakot airstrike in 2019 that thwarted Pakistan's devious game plans. It all began with India getting the advantage over Siachen, Pakistan then trying to take back that advantage by making intrusions into Kargil, which was pushed back, and subsequently they have been trying to continue to attack India on various fronts, both in terms of terror and intrusions, which we have pushed back successfully and shown them their place. Now, there are a lot more such turning points in the latest issue of India Today magazine that will inspire you. Do pick it up, and as I said, it's a real collector's issue. Thank you for being with me in this episode of Nothing But the Truth. I look forward to having you with me next week. Nothing But the Truth.